The sun sank low over the jagged horizon of Redstone Creek, its dying light spilling through the warped wooden slats of the rusty spur saloon. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer, tobacco, and the faint tang of sweat-soaked leather. Dust motes danced in the slanting rays, stirred by the creak of boots on the uneven floorboards and the raucous laughter of men who lived by the saddle and the gun. At the heart of it all sat Caleb, quick-draw, Malone, his chair tilted back precariously, boots propped on a wobbly table scarred by years of spilled drinks and knife fights. His hat, a weathered Stetson, sat low over his brow, casting a shadow across his rugged face, but it couldn't hide the glint in his hazel eyes or the cocky grin that seemed permanently etched into his features. Caleb was a legend in these parts, a cowboy who'd outdrawn bandits, outridden storms, and outcharmed every barmaid from here to Santa Fe. His reputation was as much a part of him as the Colt revolver slung low on his hip or the battered guitar he sometimes strummed under starlit skies. Tonight, though, he was holding court with a bottle of whiskey and a story, his voice carrying over the din of clinking glasses and murmured bets at the poker table. "Marriage," he said, the word dripping with mockery as he leaned forward, slamming his glass down for emphasis. The amber liquid sloshed, catching the light like liquid fire. "Ain't nothin' but a noose with extra steps. Why'd a man like me, free as the wind, tie himself to one woman when the open range calls?" His laugh was a low, rolling thunder, and the saloon erupted in response. Cowhands, drifters, and even the grizzled bartender, Old Hank, joined in with hoots and hollers. Glasses clinked, and a few men slapped the table, their weathered faces creased with amusement. Caleb leaned back again, his grin widening as he soaked in the approval. He was in his element, the king of this dusty kingdom, where men lived by their wits and their triggers. "I've seen what marriage does," he continued, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. "Turns a man soft, ties him to a porch like a dog on a leash. I knew a fella once, best rider in Texas, could rope a steer blindfolded. Then he got hitched. Last I saw him, he was haulin' laundry for his missus, lookin' like he'd forgotten what a horse was." The crowd roared again, and Caleb tipped his hat, basking in the attention. He raised his glass, toasting to freedom, to the endless horizon, to a life unburdened by promises or picket fences. At the far end of the bar, a figure sat apart from the revelry, half hidden in the dim glow of a flickering oil lamp. Eliza Kane was a stranger to Redstone Creek, though whispers of her name had begun to circulate in the weeks since she'd ridden into town. She was a drifter, a woman with no roots and a reputation that preceded her like a storm cloud. Some said she could tame a wild Mustang with a single glance, others swore she'd outshot a bounty hunter in a duel at high noon. Her hat, wide-brimmed and black as midnight, shaded her face, but her eyes, sharp, green, and unyielding, missed nothing. She sipped her rye, her movements deliberate, her posture relaxed but coiled, like a panther watching prey. Caleb's words carried to her, and her lips twitched into a faint, knowing smile, though she said nothing. The saloon was a cacophony of noise, cards shuffling, boots stomping, a tinny piano in the corner grinding out a half-forgotten tune. Yet Eliza's silence seemed to carve out a space of its own. She'd heard men like Caleb before, men who wore their freedom like a badge, who laughed at anything that smelled of permanence. She'd seen them swagger, seen them fall, seen them undone by the very things they mocked. Her fingers traced the rim of
her glass, and her gaze flicked toward Caleb, taking in the way his hands moved as he spoke, the way his laughter seemed to fill the room like smoke. He was a man who believed his own myth, and that, she thought, was a dangerous thing. "Mark my words," Caleb went on, oblivious to the stranger's scrutiny, "no woman's gonna lasso me. I'm a lone wolf, and that's how I'll stay." He stood, stretching to his full height, his lean frame cutting an imposing silhouette against the lamplight. The crowd cheered again, and he tipped his hat with a flourish, his grin as bright as the silver spurs on his boots. "To freedom, boys," he called, raising his glass. The saloon answered in kind, a chorus of rough voices and clinking bottles. Eliza's smile deepened, though it held no warmth. She set her glass down with a soft clink, her movements precise, almost predatory. Old Hank, wiping down the bar, caught her eye and gave a slight shake of his head, as if to say, "Let the fool talk." But Eliza wasn't one to interfere, not yet. She'd learned long ago that fate had a way of dealing with men like Caleb Malone, men who laughed too loudly at things they didn't understand. She leaned back, her hat tipping forward to shadow her face further, and let the noise of the saloon wash over her. Across the room, Caleb's eyes finally landed on her, drawn by the stillness that seemed to radiate from her corner. For a moment, the gazes locked, his bold and challenging, hers steady and unreadable. He raised an eyebrow, as if expecting her to join the chorus of admiration, but she only tilted her head, her smile unchanging. The moment passed, and Caleb turned back to his audience, launching into another tale of a narrow escape from a posse in Abilene. But the weight of her gaze lingered, a faint prickle at the back of his neck, like the first hint of a storm on a clear day. The night wore on, the saloon growing louder, rowdier. A fight broke out near the poker table, quickly broken up by old Hank's shotgun propped against the bar. Caleb, undeterred, kept the crowd entertained, his stories growing wilder with each glass of whiskey. He spoke of outrunning Comanches, of staring down a rattlesnake, of winning a saloon girl's heart only to ride off at dawn. Each tale was a brick in the myth of Quickdraw Malone, the man who answered to no one, who lived for the open road and the next adventure. Eliza listened, her expression unchanging, though her mind was turning. She'd met men like Caleb before, men who thought they could outrun fate itself. She'd seen 'em undone, not by bullets or bandits, but by the quiet, relentless pull of something they couldn't name. She finished her drink, set a coin on the bar, and stood, her spurs jingling softly as she moved toward the door. The crowd parted without realizing it, sensing something in her presence that demanded space. As she stepped into the cool night air, the stars blazing overhead, Eliza glanced back through the saloon's grimy window. Caleb was still talking, still laughing, still the king of his little world. But fate, she knew, was patient. And it had a way of laughing last. The desert night stretched vast and silent over Blackwater Pass, a ribbon of starlit trail winding through jagged cliffs and scrub-dotted plains. The air was cool, sharp with the scent of sagebrush and the faint musk of earth still warm from the day's heat. Caleb, Quickdraw, Malone rode alone, his horse's hooves kicking up soft clouds of dust that shimmered in the moonlight. His Colt revolver rested easy on his hip, and his eyes scanned the horizon, alert for the rustlers he'd been hired to track. But his mind wandered, snagged on a memory that had haunted him for weeks, the stranger in the saloon, Eliza Kane, with her piercing green eyes and that maddening, knowing smile. Since that night in Redstone Creek, Eliza had crossed his path twice, each encounter leaving him more unsettled than the last. At a cattle auction, she'd outbid him for a prime stallion with a single, cool nod, her smirk cutting deeper than any insult. Then, at a swollen river crossing, she'd appeared out of nowhere, guiding his spooked horse to safety through a flash flood while he stood helpless, soaked and swearing. She hadn't said a word, just tipped her hat and ridden off, leaving him with a strange mix of gratitude and irritation. Caleb wasn't used to being outdone, especially not by a woman who seemed to see right through his carefully crafted bravado. A twig snapped, sharp and sudden, yanking him from his thoughts. His hand flew to his revolver, fingers brushing the worn grip, but before he could draw, a rope whistled through the air. It looped around his arms, tight as a vice, and yanked him from his saddle. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him, dust clogging his throat as he cursed. His horse snorted, sidestepping nervously, as a shadow loomed over him. Caleb squinted up, his heart pounding, and found himself staring into Eliza Kane's calm, amused eyes. She stood tall, her black hat tilted back, starlight glinting off the silver spurs on her boots. The lasso was taut in her gloved hands, her grip steady as she regarded him like a rancher inspecting a caught steer. "Thought you couldn't be lassoed, Quickdraw," she said, her voice low, laced with a teasing edge that made his blood simmer. She crouched beside him, close enough for him to catch the faint scent of sage and leather, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that felt like a challenge. The moonlight painted her face in sharp contrasts, highlighting the curve of her jaw and the faint scar that traced her cheek, a mark that only added to her enigma. Caleb's scowl melted into a grudging grin, though his pride stung worse than the fall. "This ain't no lasso," he muttered, tugging at the rope binding his arms. "This is a cheap trick." He twisted, testing the knots, but they held firm, expertly tied. Whoever Eliza Kane was, She knew her way around a rope better than most men he'd met. Eliza tilted her head, her smile sharpening, cutting through his bravado like a knife through butter. Fate's got a funny way of trickin' folks who laugh at it, she said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of truth. You laughed at marriage, Caleb Malone, but you didn't see me comin'. She loosened the rope with a flick of her wrist, letting it fall away, but she didn't step back. Her presence seemed to fill the space between them, a quiet force that made the vast desert feel small. Caleb scrambled to his feet, brushing dust from his coat, his heart still racing, not from the fall, but from the way her gaze held him, like a hawk pinning a rabbit. You think you can tame me, woman? He asked, his tone half joking, half hoping, his usual swagger undercut by a flicker of uncertainty. He wasn't used to feeling off balance, but Eliza had a way of turning his world sideways without even trying. Her laugh was soft, like a breeze rustling through the prairie grass, but it carried a knowing edge that made his skin prickle. I don't tame what's wild, she said, stepping closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her eyes. But I reckon fate's got plans for us both. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned, her movements fluid as she mounted her horse with a grace that left him momentarily speechless. The mare, a sleek black creature with eyes as sharp as its rider's, snorted as Eliza settled into the saddle. Caleb's hand lingered on the rope she'd left coiled at his feet, his fingers tracing the rough hemp as if it held some clue to the woman who'd just upended his night. You always sneak up on folks like that, he called after her, trying to reclaim some control, but his voice betrayed a hint of curiosity he couldn't suppress. Eliza glanced back, her silhouette framed against the starlit sky, her smile as enigmatic as ever. Only the ones worth catchin', she said, her words hanging in the air like a promise or a threat. With a gentle nudge, she urged her horse forward, and the night swallowed her, the soft jingle of her spurs fading into the distance. Caleb stood there, alone in the moonlight, the desert stretching endless around him. For the first time in years, the open range didn't feel like freedom, it felt like a question, vast and unanswerable. He picked up the rope, turning it over in his hands, and a slow grin spread across his face. Fate, it seemed, was laughing louder than he ever had, and he wasn't entirely sure he minded. He mounted his horse, his eyes lingering on the trail where Eliza had disappeared. The rustlers could wait till morning. For now, he had something, or someone, else on his mind, and the thought of it set his pulse racing in a way no gunfight ever had. The lone wolf, it seemed, had just caught the scent of something new, and the hunt was on.